Heat pressed down on the scrubland south of Brimstone like a physical weight, turning air to liquid shimmer and baking the hard pan until it cracked in geometric patterns. Pauline Hart knelt in the center of the road, 8 months pregnant, one palm flat against earth hot enough to blister. Her mule was gone, scattered by riders who'd fired pistols skyward until the animal's eyes rolled white with terror, and it bolted into the wasteland, leaving her stranded with nothing but the leather satchel strapped across her chest and the certain knowledge that she was about to die. Reginald Pike stood over her, casting a shadow that offered no relief. He was dressed like someone important, starched collar, defying the heat embroidered waistcoat, buttoned precisely boots, polished until they reflected the merciless sun. But his face betrayed the violence coiled beneath all that expensive tailoring. His jaw was set, his eyes narrow with the particular rage of a man denied what he considered his birthright. "Final chance, Mrs. Hart." Each word emerged clipped and controlled, more frightening than shouting would have been. "Hand over that satchel, and you can walk back to town. Keep it, and I promise you'll die out here where nobody will find you until the buzzards have finished." Pauline's ribs ached where the strap bit into swollen flesh. Inside that bag were pages that could destroy an empire built on theft and manipulation. She'd carried those pages 300 miles through hostile territory, sleeping in ditches when necessary, eating whatever she could find or afford, always watching behind for the men she knew would eventually come. She hadn't survived all that just to surrender in sight of justice. No, the word came out steady, despite the terror clawing at her throat, and she took fierce satisfaction in that steadiness. Reginald's expression didn't shift. He simply drew back his boot, measured deliberate, calculated, and drove it forward into her side. The impact lifted her off the ground and sent her sprawling into sage that scratched and tore. She hit hard every instinct, screaming at her to curl inward arms, crossing over her belly, knees, drawing up to protect the child inside. White-hot pain exploded through her ribs. Dust filled her mouth and nose and eyes. She heard the metallic chime of his spur as he stepped closer, heard his breathing controlled, unhurried, the breathing of a man who believed himself absolutely untouchable. "This is how it ends," she thought. "This is how my baby dies before taking a first breath." Then the earth began to shake. Not earthquake tremors, something more purposeful. The rhythmic thunder of boots striking hard pan at full sprint, growing louder with each heartbeat, relentless as floodwater. Pauline forced her sand-filled eyes open and saw the figure cutting through the heat shimmer like judgment made flesh. Tall, lean, moving with a predator's fluid economy. Buckskin tunic fringed at shoulders and wrists, the leather catching light with each stride. A beaded chest harness worked in Lakota patterns, dark hair streaming loose past his shoulders, a long knife riding his right hip in a plain sheath worn smooth by years of use. His face, all hard angles and sunned darkened skin, was locked on Reginald with an intensity that promised absolute violence. Takala didn't waste breath on warnings. He simply ran closing distance with terrible purpose. And Pauline knew with bone-deep certainty that Reginald Pike had made a fatal miscalculation. 6 weeks earlier, Pauline had stepped down from Cyrus Bale's freight wagon at Owl Canyon, carrying everything she owned in a single leather satchel. $3 silver weighted her pocket. She'd watched Cyrus's wagon disappear north wheels, kicking up dust that hung suspended in still air. And she'd understood even then that what she carried was more dangerous than a loaded pistol. Cyrus kept books, obsessively detailed books where every mile traveled, every pound of cargo, every cent earned or spent was recorded in columns so precise they could have been printed. But Cyrus also kept observations notes scribbled in margins, coded references tucked between official entries, patterns that transformed simple freight manifests into evidence of conspiracy. telegraph receipts that didn't match official records, payments disguised as administrative fees but traceable to specific individuals, water rights transfers coinciding suspiciously with voter registration changes, ballot box routing instructions that made no logistical sense until you understood they were designed to lose certain votes while amplifying others, and names repeated like an indictment. Sheriff Ephraim Pike, Reginald Pike, Glassy Joe Mallory, the enforcer with the clouded fake eye and the Sharps rifle he could shoot with terrifying accuracy. What Cyrus had documented over 2 patient years was systematic theft of an election combined with engineered drought that starved families into submission. The Pikes had been acquiring water rights to Tallow Creek through legal purchases and illegal pressure, diverting flow into their ranch through authorized transfers that looked legitimate on paper but amounted to murder by thirst. The creek-feeding Lakota camps upstream and poor homesteads downstream had dwindled to nothing while Pike and flourished. Ballot manipulation was subtler but equally devastating. Extra boxes appearing in friendly precincts, boxes vanishing from hostile districts, counting delays that somehow always favored incumbents. Cyrus had tracked it through freight records. Ballot boxes were cargo, and he'd noted where they went and where they didn't. Discrepancies that couldn't be explained by accident. When Cyrus took 3 bullets near coal dust mine, shot at close range, and left to bleed on his wagon seat, he'd used his last conscious moments to gasp 2 instructions. Get the book safe and find someone who listen and can't be bought. Pauline had mailed duplicates of the most damning pages to Winterfred Hale Brimstone schoolteacher, who'd once lent Pauline a winter coat without asking for repayment. Then she'd sewn the original ledger into a hidden pocket inside her satchel and run. Running had brought her nearly a year earlier to a winter camp near Crow Wing with a broken ankle and empty pockets, close enough to freezing that she'd stopped shivering, which meant death was near. Tokala had been tracking wounded deer when he found her beneath a fallen cottonwood boot, off foot swollen purple and radiating heat. He'd approached slowly, hands visible, speaking English with barely a trace of accent. That bone's broken clean. Walk on it and you'll be crippled permanent. She tried standing anyway, pride stronger than sense. Her ankle collapsed immediately, dropping her back to frozen ground with a gasp she couldn't suppress. Tokala hadn't lectured. He'd simply knelt, examined the injury with gentle thoroughness, and set the bone with one swift motion that made her bite through her lip. He'd wrapped it with strips from his own shirt, built a nearly smokeless fire, and shared dried venison without comment. They'd stayed 3 days while the ankle healed enough for walking. She learned his name meant fox, that he was Lakota by birth and choice, that he avoided white law because it had never been anything but corrupt. He learned she could read, write, and calculate faster than most educated men, that she'd been married once to a drunk who'd worked himself into an early grave, and that she trusted slowly but completely. When they parted, he gave her a beaded cord for her wrist. Show this to any Lakota you meet. They'll know you're protected. She wore it still hidden beneath her sleeve. 4 months later, she'd sought him out deliberately, tracking rumors until she found him near Bear Creek. She told him straight that she carried his child conceived during those survival nights, when cold and loneliness drew them together under shared blankets where warmth meant life. He'd studied her silently, then asked, "What do you need?" "A legal marriage certificate, not promises or pretty words, just paper. So when this baby comes, the law protects us instead of destroys us." They'd married the next day before the territorial clerk papers signed, witnessed by strangers paid with a drink each. Quiet, practical, immediately controversial. A white woman and Lakota man in civil ceremony, the kind of union that made respectable people whisper and others sneer. But it was legal. That was what mattered. Tocala respected her sharp mind and the grit that kept her moving when others collapsed. Pauline respected his restraint, his weapons skills, and the patience that let him sit motionless for hours when haste meant death. He avoided town law because it was corrupt. He never avoided her. Now, with election 2 weeks distant, and the pikes hunting the ledger like wolves, tracking wounded prey, distance was impossible. Brimstone occupied a cleft where Tombstone Ridge met dry flats stretching toward Dagger Point. Built fast during Silver Rush years, false fronts and raw timber, optimistic paint already peeling after 5 years. When, or played out, the town pivoted to serving scattered ranches and homesteads. The saloon doubled as informal bank. The courthouse doubled as jail. Sheriff Ephraim Pike ran everything with iron discipline rooted in controlling essential resources. His son Reginald managed the ranch water rights and unofficial enforcement. Though enforcement was polite language for what Glassy Joe did with his Sharps rifle and that clouded eye that never blinked. Dr. Ida Bell kept an office above the druggist stitching wounds and delivering babies with equal competence. She was known for quiet defiance, treating Lakota patients others refused, declining to report gunshots when she suspected the law would weaponize information. She'd liked Pauline immediately. She liked Tocala more because he never argued payment and brought venison when possible. Lucky Pete drove the stagecoach connecting Brimstone to Red Rock and civilization beyond. Gregarious 50s who loved gossip like other men loved whiskey, but had a soft heart and keen eye for injustice. He'd warned Pauline the Pikes were asking about a woman with a satchel. Orlando Dawes farmed 40 hard acres downstream on Tallow Creek with wife Martha and 15-year-old son Ronan. 43 weathered with permanent squint from decades staring into unforgiving sun. When the creek stopped 6 months back, his well dried within weeks. Crops withered. Martha started coughing from omnipresent dust. He demanded answers at town meetings until Reginald publicly threatened him with a surveying error that would cost him half his land. These people mattered. These people would live with whatever came next. That morning when Pauline rode out to meet Tocala at their usual spot near Granite Pass, she'd been paranoid, careful. Main road, good visibility. Satchel double-buckled across her chest, head down, posture unthreatening. But the Pikes had patience and resources. Riders stationed along every approach, watching. When Pauline passed the 3rd marker, they'd spooked her mule with gunfire until the animal threw her and bolted. Then Reginald arrived alone, confident, certain of victory. He hadn't counted on Tocala always tracking her when she was late. Impact when Tocala hit Reginald was catastrophic 200 lb of bone and muscle at full speed. No technique, no finesse, just momentum and willingness to hurt and be hurt equally. His shoulder drove into Reginald's chest like artillery lifting the smaller man off his feet, driving him backward through air before slamming him into hard pan hard enough to raise a dust cloud. Reginald's hat spun away. His pistol half-drawn skittered across rocks with harsh clatter. But Reginald wasn't soft. Ranch-raised horse-breaking cattle herding. He twisted immediately, knee driving up into Tocala's thigh, aiming for vulnerable muscle. Connected solidly, Tocala grunted, but had already shifted weight, rolling with impact. Using Reginald's momentum against him, he pinned the gun hand with his knee. All weight concentrated there, and his knife came out smooth. Plain steel-worn grip meant for work, not show. He pressed the flat against Reginald's throat. Not cutting, making the threat explicit. "We're going to town. You'll answer for kicking a pregnant woman. Everyone will see exactly what you are." Reginald spat dust in fury. "You're dead. My father will hang you before sunset. Maybe. But you're coming with me. Every person in Brimstone will know why." From a rocky outcrop 50 yards east, a rifle cracked distinctive heavy report of a sharp's. The round kissed Takala's left shoulder, punching through buckskin fringe and skin missing bone by perhaps half an inch, but tearing muscle and drawing immediate blood. Takala jerked from impact, but didn't cry out. He threw himself sideways, releasing Reginald, but grabbing Pauline's arm, dragging her behind the nearest coverlow sage mound and rocks that wouldn't stop bullets, but might deflect them. He landed atop her, careful not to crush her belly arms braced beside her head. "Stay down. Don't move." Glass-eyed Joe stood silhouetted on the outcrop, sharps braced against shoulder, that clouded eye catching sun like polished stone. He worked the breech mechanism, spent cartridge ejecting, and fired again. Bullet chewed dirt 18 in from Pauline's boot, spraying grit. Takala fumbled for the Colt, tucked in his Belt-Town concession, where knife alone wouldn't suffice. His shoulder screamed, but his right hand was steady, drawing the revolver, thumbing back the hammer, rising just enough to sight. 2 shots, rapid and deliberate. First shattered rock near Joe's position fragments, singing through air. Joe flinched fractionally. Second forced him behind his horse-breaking sightline. Other riders who'd been holding back decided they weren't paid enough and wheeled away, kicking for distance. Joe followed, but not immediately. He stood there, that dead eye locked on the satchel across Pauline's chest. Then he turned his horse deliberately, almost casually, and rode after his companions at unhurried walk. "Message clear. I know what you have. I'm watching. I'm patient." Takala counted heartbeats 30-40 until dust from their retreat vanished on the horizon. Only then did he roll carefully off Pauline and help her sit his injured arm, moving stiffly, blood running to his wrist. "How bad?" she asked, hands already reaching for the wound. "Bad enough. That's not an answer. It's all I can give now." He pulled cloth from inside his tunic and pressed it against bleeding. "Can you walk?" "Yes. Can you have to?" She tore a strip from her hem and wrapped it tight around his shoulder, fingers deft despite trembling. When she tied it off, she didn't release him immediately. Her hand lingered, thumb brushing unbroken skin below the wound. "Thank you. Family doesn't thank family for being family." First time either had used that word. It settled between them like stone, dropping into still water, creating ripples, changing everything. They walked toward Brimstone as sun began its long slide west, turning sky copper and gold. Takala kept his arm around Pauline's back, taking weight off her belly. She gripped his belt with both hands, steadying him when blood loss made him sway. By the time they reached Dr. Ida Bell's office, full dark had fallen, and stars pricked through purple sky. Ida took one look to gray beneath tan blood, soaking through bandage. Pauline breathing hard with hand pressed to her side and pointed wordlessly to the cot. "Sit, both of you." Tula sat. Pauline lowered herself beside him, hips touching hand, finding his. Ida worked with efficient grace, born from sewing countless men, knowing speed mattered, but precision mattered more. She cleaned with whiskey that made Takala's jaw clench, threaded curved needle with gut string, began stitching with small, even loops. Takala kept eyes locked on Pauline's face, tracking every tension flicker, how her breathing hitched when needle pulled through flesh. When Ada tied off the last stitch and cut thread with decisive snap, she stepped back and wiped her hands on already stained rag. "You two just painted targets on your backs." Pauline's voice was steady despite everything. "We already had them. Now at least we know they're shooting." Ida glanced at the satchel still strapped across Pauline's chest. "That what they want?" "Yes. Then guard it like your life depends on it. Because next time they won't stop with kicking." Sheriff Ephraim Pike made his announcement at dawn, standing on courthouse steps, arms crossed over chest, gone thick with middle age. but still powerful. Tall, iron gray at temples, with voice carrying natural authority even at normal volume. By emergency order, effective immediately, any person found guilty of disturbing the peace slandering officers or interfering with official business may be detained without bail until after election concludes. This is necessary for community safety and democratic integrity. Murmur ran through the crowd. Shopkeepers and early risers gathered for weekly cattle auction. A few men spat tobacco. Most stayed silent, calculating risks. Reginald stood at his father's right, fine suit, brushed clean, but unable to hide the bruise darkening his jaw. He lifted one hand pointed directly at Tokala, standing at the back with Pauline beside him. That man assaulted me yesterday on public road. Unprovoked attack on a citizen conducting lawful business. I'm filing formal charges assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. Tokala's expression didn't flicker. Pauline's hand tightened on his arm hard enough to bruise. Ephraim nodded, as though this were perfectly reasonable natural order of law and justice. Assault on a gentleman is serious. I'll expect you to present yourself for questioning. Mr. Deliberate pause, as if the name were beneath notice. Tokala. Pauline's voice cut through murmur, like blade through canvas. His name is Tokala, and he was defending me from your son's boot while I was 8 months pregnant and helpless on the ground. Ephraim's pale eyes flicked to her, lingered on her swollen belly with something between calculation and contempt, then moved away as though she were beneath consideration. That allegation will be investigated in due course, ma'am. For now, I strongly suggest you both remain where I can find you. Not suggestion. Threat wrapped in civil language. Tokala could have run kinfolk in camps who'd hide him trails through hills white lawmen didn't know. But Pauline couldn't run 8 months pregnant without risking the child. And Tokala wouldn't leave her. So he stayed. They took refuge in Edida's back room. Narrow cot cast iron stove window overlooking alley that would give warning of approach. Tokala positioned himself by the door, not pacing, just standing in a way that made clear no one was entering unless he permitted. Pauline tried sleeping, but rest came in fitful snatches, broken by the baby's movements and her racing mind. Every time she shifted, seeking comfort, Tokala glanced over expressions softening fractionally to reveal genuine concern. Near midnight, she woke to find him sitting on floor beside the cot, back against wall rifle across knees, eyes half closed but alert, tracking every sound from the street below. "You need sleep," she said quietly. "I will when you do, matter of fact, as though logic rather than devotion." She reached out hand, finding his on his thigh, fingers curled around his palm thumb, tracing calluses earned from rope and reins and knife work. "You're stubborn. I'm practical. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." He turned his hand palm up, let hers rest there skin to skin warm, despite cooling night. Being stubborn means doing something even when it's foolish. Being practical means doing what needs doing, regardless of personal cost. And what needs doing now? Keeping you safe, keeping that ledger safe. Making sure, when the baby comes, you're both alive to see a future. Pauline's throat tightened. "What about keeping you safe?" "Not the priority. It is to me." He looked at her, then really looked dark eyes, steady and serious. "Then we'll both have to be very careful." Neither slept well after that. At dawn, Winterfred Hale slipped through the back door, school children trailing like ducklings. Thin, sharp-featured gray hair and severe bun. Despite being only 35 ink stains on cuffs, no washing removed. She moved with brisk efficiency, born from years teaching in underfunded schools where she supplied half the materials herself. She handed Pauline a folded paper without preamble, pressing it into her palm discreetly as passing a hymnal in church. Inside was the duplicate ledger copy, wrapped in oilcloth against moisture. I hid the rest in the school coal scuttle. Wyford whispered, barely audible over children's chatter. Under the false bottom I installed last winter for storing supplies the county refuses to fund. If they search me, they won't think to search children's things. Takala, still by the door, gave single-nod wordless respect for different courage. "Thank you," Pauline said, meaning it absolutely. Wyford's mouth compressed thin. "Don't thank me yet. Just keep that hidden and keep yourselves breathing. Elections in 12 days. Between now and then, the Pikes will get desperate. Desperate men do terrible things." The telegraph office occupied a cramped corner where Main Street met optimistically named Dust Avenue Dirt Track, turning to impassable mud when it rained, staying dust otherwise. Inside, single clerk manned the key, surrounded by ledgers and clicking apparatus connecting Brimstone to wider world. Tobias Sims was narrow mid-30s, thinning hair, perpetually nervous expression of someone knowing too much about powerful people. Sheriff Pike's cousin by marriage connection, securing this position despite his drinking and occasionally shaky hand. Tokala and Pauline entered just after noon, when heat made most people seek shade. Office stifling despite open window. Sims looked up, eyes darting nervously from Pauline's face to Tokala's to the satchel across her chest. Adam's apple bobbed visibly. "Help you folks." Pauline stepped to counter, moving carefully to avoid jarring belly. "I need to send a message to the territorial advocate in Red Rock. It's urgent." "What sort of message?" "Wary." She'd prepared wording meticulously, stripping inflammatory language, sticking to verifiable facts. Evidence of election irregularities and water rights violations involving local officials. Names, dates, financial records available for immediate verification. Request formal investigation before territorial elections proceed. Sims set pencil down with exaggerated care, as though it might explode if handled roughly. "Ma'am, I can't send that." "Why not?" "Because it's slanderous. Accusing officials without solid proof actionable under territorial law could get me sued or fired or worse. I have proof. Documented, detailed, irrefutable. So you claim false helplessness gesture. But I'm not risking my position on something that could land me in court." Tokala moved then, not threateningly, just casual shift, bringing him nearer the window where afternoon sun streamed in thick, golden bars. Close enough that Sims could clearly see knife hilt at hip colt tucked in belt, and most importantly, the absolutely calm expression promising he'd do whatever proved necessary without hesitation. "Send it clean," Takala said quietly, no particular emphasis. Every word exactly as she dictated, no changes, no omissions. Sims's hand trembled visibly, picking up pencil again. He transcribed in jerky, uneven script, other hand-working key in stuttering bursts, suggesting terror or incompetence or both. Metallic clicks filled silence, sharp, insistent. When acknowledgement came back, 3 clicks indicating message received. Sims wiped sweat with yellowed handkerchief. "There, done." They left without answering Tokala's hand, gentle on Pauline's elbow, crossing street toward Livery. By the time they'd saddled a horse and ridden half a mile out to inspect telegraph line personally, they found what they'd expected. Wire cut cleanly with proper tools, insulators deliberately smashed, distinctive hobnail boot prints pressed deep into soft earth beside poles, Joe's unmistakable signature. "They're not even hiding it," Pauline said, staring at severed wire. "Good," Takala replied grimly. "Obvious enemies make mistakes in confidence. Hidden enemies kill you." 5 miles downstream where Tallow Creek was supposed to feed irrigation ditches, keeping small farms marginally viable. Orlando stood in what should have been ankle-deep water. Instead, cracked mud dead fish stench of rot hanging heavy in shimmering air. Other homesteaders had gathered Johnsons from North Ramirez family, from South Matt the Lakota elder, with 3 younger men from upstream camps. They'd come because water was shared lifeline, deliberately severed by men with power and without conscience. Pike crew strung barbed wire across Creek Gate 2 days back. Orlando said voice tight with barely contained fury. Posted official-looking sign saying private property under territorial water rights grant legal language that means nothing except they're stealing what belongs to all of us. Creek's not private, Matt said flatly. Never has been, never will be. Water belongs to everyone, or no one. Tell them that. As if summoned, Pike crew appeared on ridge above 6 men with shovels and surveyor's chain, moving with casual arrogance of people backed by power. They didn't ask permission or offer explanation, just started driving posts deeper, stringing more wire, expanding theft in daylight while people watched helplessly. Shouting erupted. Orlando stepped forward, son Ronan beside him, despite being only 15 and small for age. You've got no right to fence this creek. Foreman, thick-necked man named Dutch, earning position through willingness to hurt people for money. Cut him off dismissively. Got papers signed by sheriff himself. Complaints take them to courthouse. Courthouse is owned by the man stealing our water. Not my problem. Get back before someone gets hurt. A rock flew from somewhere in crowd. Probably younger man. Probably from frustration more than calculation. Struck Dutch in shoulder. Not hard enough to truly injure, but hard enough to spark violence, building like thunderclouds. Dutch swung his shovel like club flatbee blade, whistling through air before connecting with Homesteader's head. Man went down hard. Blood hit dry earth and disappeared instantly, soaking in like the water they'd all been denied. Then everyone was fighting, not organized. Just desperate people pushed past endurance, finally pushing back. Tokala and Pauline heard shouting from quarter-mile, distant, and kicked horse into groundying gallop. Arrived to chaos. Men grappling in mud and dust fists, and tools swung with equal abandon. Blood spattering earth that hadn't seen water in months. Small child crying near bank where she'd fallen. Tokala dismounted fluidly, leaving Pauline controlling reins. He waded into violence with hands deliberately open, trying to pull combatants apart, using body to block punches rather than throw them. One pikeman saw a beaded chest harness, recognized it, swung his shovel at Kala's head with murderous intent. Tokala's knife came up on pure instinct blade, turning shovel edge with harsh metallic clang. The impact jarred his injured shoulder, viciously fresh blood seeping through bandage, but he didn't drop the knife. Then another pikeman, seeing Tokala distracted, swung a heavy wooden stake like a club aiming for his head. Tokala twisted at the last instant. Stake missed his skull, but connected brutally with his left rib cage. The impact was sickening, a meaty thud that drove air from his lungs. He felt something crack inside, pain exploding, white-hot through his torso. He staggered, gasping, and instinctively wrapped his free arm around his ribs. Every breath now was agony, sharp stabbing pain that told him at least one rib was cracked, maybe more. From ridge above, rifles fired, not aimed, but warning rounds meant to scatter crowd. Bullets kicked up dirt, spanged off rocks, sent everyone diving for cover. In chaos, young Ronan Dawes caught a bullet in calf. Not direct hit, but ricochet gouging through muscle, drawing bright arterial blood pumping with his racing heart. Boy went down screaming, clutching leg, young face white with shock. Tokala didn't hesitate or calculate. He simply moved, scooping Ronan up in both arms, despite the screaming pain in his ribs, slinging the boy across his shoulders in fireman's carry. Ronan was 14, nearly full-grown, heavy with far-earned muscle. But Tokala ran anyway, his shoulder burning his ribs, a white-hot agony with each jarring step that made him want to vomit from pain. Pauline spurred horse forward, not fleeing, but flanking skirt, already torn into strips for bandaging. When Tokala stumbled over uneven ground, she was there instantly pressing makeshift bandages into his free hand, steadying Ronan's wounded leg to prevent further damage. They made it to Ida's office as sun touched western horizon, painting everything blood and fire. Doctor took one look at blood-soaked boy and pointed sharply to examination table. Flat on your back now. She worked with methodical precision, cleaning wound thoroughly, despite Ronan's screams, determining bullet-carved furrow through muscle without hitting bone or major vessels. Stitched closed with practiced efficiency, wrapped in clean linen, dosed boy with Eldenum, cut with whiskey for coming pain. Orlando arrived 20 minutes later, wild-eyed and terrified, having run entire distance nearly collapsed, seeing son alive and bandaged. "Thank you," he said hoarsely, gripping Tokala's hand with both his own. "Thank you. I can never. No need." Tala interrupted quietly, one arm still wrapped protectively around his cracked ribs. "He's a child. Children shouldn't bleed because powerful men want resources that don't belong to them." Pauline pulled Tokala aside the moment Orlando stopped thanking him, hands gentle but firm on his arms. "You're hurt worse than you're saying. I'll manage. Let me see." Reluctantly, he let her peel back his shirt. The left side of his ribcage was already turning deep purple swelling visibly. When she pressed gently, he couldn't suppress a sharp intake of breath. "Cracked ribs," Ida said, examining with professional assessment. "At least one, possibly two. Nothing I can do but wrap them tight. You'll be in significant pain for weeks, worse when you breathe deep or move suddenly." "We don't have weeks, I know. So you'll work through it and accept you can't move like you normally do." She wrapped his ribs tightly with long strips of cloth, binding them to prevent movement that would worsen the injury. When finished, Tokala could barely take full breaths without pain lancing through his side. "Don't get hit there again," Ida said dryly. "Next time might puncture a lung." Lucky Pete found them early next morning, with offers sounding simultaneously brilliant and suicidal. He'd drive them to Red Rock personally, using regular stagecoach run as cover. If they could deliver Ledger directly to the Advocate's printing partner story, could run next edition distributed across 3 territories before Pikes could suppress it. It's 40 miles of open road. Pete said usual jovial expression replaced by something serious. "They'll be watching every mile. But if we time it right, leave at first light, use that storm front moving in for afternoon cover, we might actually make it." "Might isn't a guarantee," Pauline pointed out, hand resting on belly. "No, ma'am, but sitting here waiting for them to kick down the door isn't a guarantee either. At least this way we're acting, choosing our fate, instead of waiting for them to choose it." Tokala and Pauline exchanged long look, wordless communication, developing between people who've survived together. Trust, absolutely, no longer need words for important conversations. Finally, Tolka nodded once, though the movement made his ribs scream. "We go." They loaded stagecoach at dawn, when eastern sky just lightened from black to purple. Tokala rode inside with Pauline, rifle across knees, methodically checking loads in both his Colt and spare revolver borrowed from Ida's gun cabinet. Pauline sat across satchel clutch to chest like armor, face pale, but set with determination. Pete climbed to driver's box, gathered reins, whistled team into motion. 10 minutes without incident. Good time on road. More optimistic suggestion than construction. Landscape rolled past in endless brown and gray-green sage and rock and scattered Joshua trees, reaching twisted arms toward empty sky. At Coyote Bend, Where a road cut through narrow defile between two low ridges, the barrier appeared. Fresh-cut logs and brush piled deliberately across road, far too substantial for natural debris, too carefully positioned for accident. Pete saw it barely in time, hauling back hard on reins, with warning shout lost in Team's panicked whinny. Horses tried desperately to stop, hooves scrabbling for purchase on loose gravel. Coach skidded sideways, wheels sliding, whole vehicle tilting dangerously for one suspended, breathless moment. It felt like they might hold road and stay upright. Then left rear wheel struck concealed rock with sickening force. Axles snapped with sound exactly like rifle shot. Entire coach tilted violently and began falling. Takala kicked door open, even as they tipped, catching Pauline around waist, pulling her bodily out into open air. They hit ground, rolling Takala underneath, taking full impact with back and shoulders to protect her arms wrapped completely around her to shield belly. Sharp rocks bit into spine. Injured shoulder exploded with fresh agony. Cracked ribs screamed as his body absorbed the impact and her weight. But Pauline didn't strike ground. They rolled twice, 3 times before stopping behind boulder, barely large enough for cover. Both gasped for breath. Takala from pain radiating from shoulder ribs everywhere. Pauline from shock and crushing fear for unborn child. "Are you hurt?" Tokala's hands moved immediately over her, checking for injuries with desperate thoroughness despite his own agony. "The baby, we're fine, we're fine." She gripped his wrist hard enough to bruise, anchoring herself. "But they're here." First rifle shot came from northern outcrop, unmistakable heavy sharps report. Everyone in territory feared. Round struck boulders 6 in from Takala's head, showering them with stinging rock chips. 2 more riders appeared on southern ridge, rifles already raised. Takala pulled his Colt and returned fire with deliberate precision born from years of necessity. Not wild shooting to intimidate, but carefully placed shots with specific purposes. First shattered Joe's rifle breech mechanism in lucky hit, 1000-to-1 chance of striking such small target at this distance. Metal fragments sprayed. Joe cursed, dropped weapon. Second caught Southern rider's horse in haunch. Not killing wound, but painful enough to send animal bucking, screaming, dumping rider hard enough. He didn't immediately rise. Third rider made visible calculation, decided he wasn't paid enough, wheeled, and fled toward horizon at full gallop. But Joe didn't run, never ran, just stood there, that dead eye gleaming, and calmly began checking his damaged rifle to see if it could still fire. "The horses," Takala said. "Urg, urgently," each word costing him his cracked ribs, protested. "We need them loose." "What about you? I'll cover you. Keep that satchel safe and move fast." "Takala, move now. Don't waste the time on buying." Pauline ran bent low while Takala laid covering fire, one carefully aimed shot every few seconds, just enough to keep Joe's head down. Pete was already cutting traces with belt knife hands, shaking but functional. They rode back toward Brimstone on 2 exhausted horses, carrying 3 people in desperation, moving faster than wisdom normally allowed. Behind them, Joe watched from his outcrop. Made no attempt to pursue. Didn't need to. Message delivered clearly. "I can reach you anywhere. I'm watching. I'm patient." Storm clouds built on western horizon, promising violence to come. That night, with wind beginning to rise and first cold drops spattering against windows, Wyfred Hale came to Ida's office for a 3rd time. Different. She came alone after full dark, moving through back alleys like ghost usual confident stride, replaced by something furtive and afraid. She sat on cod edge where Pauline rested, hands folded tightly, and began speaking so low they had to lean close. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have said weeks ago, but I was afraid of what it would mean." Afraid of what? Pauline asked gently. Last winter, Reginald Pike started courting me. Except it wasn't courting. Pressure, coercion in polite language. He'd come after children left Stan too close, say things about how dangerous it was for women alone, how I desperately needed male protection, whether I realized it or not. Tokala, leaning carefully against wall to avoid stressing ribs, spoke without moving. Did he assault you? Not physically, but he made threats, veiled, then increasingly explicit. When I refused, definitively told him I had zero interest in any relationship. He became furious, said I was ungrateful, stupid, didn't understand how things worked. What did he do? Pauline asked, suspecting she knew. Wyfred pulled folded paper from her sleeve. Not ledger, but something else. Photographic print made with a collodion wet plate process capturing documents with perfect clarity. Print showed page from official ledger, complete with embossed seal pressed into red wax at bottom. Seal unmistakable office of the Sheriff Brimstone County. Beside seal written in neat precise hand that could only be Ephraim Pike's was notation dated 5 months earlier. Creek diversion approved for ballot security purposes per territorial emergency powers. Flow redirection to commence upon final precinct boundary confirmation. All objections filed through official channels held pending post-election review. EP Pauline stared trained bookkeepers, mind immediately grasping implications. They planned it, everything. Water theft was an opportunistic part of election strategy from the beginning. Yes, Winterfred confirmed, voice shaking slightly. Control water control who can afford full-day traveling to polling stations. Camps and homesteads with dry wells can't spare manpower or time. They stay home from desperate necessity, lose their voice. Meanwhile, precincts near Pike Water ones reliably voting right. Those turn out in force. Pauline's mind raced connecting pieces she'd seen in Cyrus's ledger, but hadn't fully understood. There were margin notes, references to witness elimination near CM, and depot incident requires cleanup. I thought random jottings, but CM coal dust mine. That's where Cyrus was shot. Wyfred nodded slowly. I think Cyrus witnessed something, or someone told him something implicating Reginald directly in violence. They killed him for knowing. Takala pushed carefully off-wall expression, cold and focused, in way that made him look dangerous despite his injuries. What else? There's more you're not saying. Reginald locked winter rations. Government supplies supposed to be distributed, fairly flour, salt, pork, lard beans. Etta volunteered to coordinate distribution to camps and homesteads. Reginald seized everything, put it in Pike Warehouse, declared it election property that couldn't be released until after vote. Key to that warehouse is in courthouse safe. You saw this? Heard him tell his father. I was at clerk's office filing school supply requisitions. They came in to use private office. Didn't realize I was behind file partition. Ephraim told Reginald, keep everything locked until after election. Then they'd sort out distribution and tallies appropriately. Pauline felt cold despite room warmth. Not just fraud, systematic oppression, using survival needs as weapons, holding water and food hostage to manipulate democracy itself. And your ledger proves all of it. Wyfred said, because Cyrus tracked every piece, every water transfer, every delayed shipment, every misouted ballot box. He saw a pattern because he was hauling physical evidence without realizing what it meant until too late. Takala spoke quietly, voice carrying absolute certainty despite pain from ribs making each word cost him. We take ledger to polling barn election day, open it publicly where everyone can see and hear, make them read it aloud so there's no possibility of denial. But first we open that safe and prove they've been using starvation as political tool. Pauline's mind already working practical and precise. She pulled butcher paper Pete had given her, spread it on small table, used charcoal stub to sketch routes and positions from memory. Courthouse backs directly onto alley behind Main Street. Safes on second floor northwest corner office. I saw it filing marriage papers. Mine road runs behind building less traveled, especially at night. Her fingers traced potential routes, marking sight lines and guard positions she'd observed. Takala leaned carefully over her shoulder to study rough map, his breath warm near her ear as he pointed to ridge, providing both cover and observation. Their hands touched his finger, and hers landing on same crucial point simultaneously. Contact lingered, neither pulled away immediately. Moments stretched, filled with unspoken understanding, and something deeper neither had fully acknowledged. "If we go during storm," Takala said, voice rougher than usual, each word carefully measured to avoid stressing ribs. "Wind and thunder will cover sound, but will work essentially blind in darkness." "I can pick that safe," Pauline said with quiet confidence. "Cyrus taught me everything about locks and safes during long winter nights when freight was slow. But I'll need light and time." "How much time?" 10 minutes minimum, maybe 15 if more complicated than I remember. Dangerously long-standing, exposed in enemy territory. "I know, but I don't see another way." They were very close now, shoulders nearly touching as both bent over crude map. Pauline could feel his warmth radiating through cloth smell leather and sage scent always clinging to him here. Each carefully controlled breath he took, despite cracked ribs. Tokala turned head slightly, dark eyes, meeting hers at distance measured in inches. For one suspended moment, world narrowed to just them, space between filled with possibility and longing and absolute trust. Then baby kicked sharp, vigorous movement, making Pauline gasp, automatically pressing hand to belly. Spell broke. Reality crashed back. Takala pulled away, clearing throat, putting professional distance between them. "We should rest," he said, voice carefully neutral. "Storm breaks tomorrow. We move tomorrow night." "Yes," Pauline agreed. Own voice not quite steady. "Tomorrow." But neither slept well, and it wasn't only coming danger keeping them wakeful. Glassy Joe took Winterfred at school dismissal following day. Children had scattered toward homes, laughing and shoving with boundless energy of young ones finally released. Winifred was gathering primers, erasing arithmetic problems from slate board humming. Quietly habit developed to make solitary cleanup less lonely. Didn't hear him enter through back door he'd forced. Didn't sense anything wrong until his hand clamped over her mouth with bruising force. Arm wrapped around waist, lifting her completely off feet as though she weighed nothing. She fought with everything, scratching, face kicking backward toward vulnerable targets, trying desperately to bite the hand-covering mouth. But Joe was strong, experienced, utterly indifferent to her distress. He dragged her out back door, threw her into waiting wagon hard enough to knock wind from lungs, drove north toward coal dust mine before anyone saw. Children found scattered possessions 30 minutes later, primers dropped in dirt, shawl torn and trampled, desperate chalk smear on doorframe where she'd managed to drag hand in last attempt, leaving evidence. They ran immediately to Lucky Pete, watering team at livery. Pete took one look, cursed with surprising creativity, ran to fetch Ida. Pauline was resting when they burst in with news lying on side hand, pressed to belly where baby had been restless all afternoon. Moment she heard Wyford's name, tried standing. Sharp pain lanced through abdomen. Not labor yet, but false contractions from stress, painful enough to gray vision and steal breath. "You're not going anywhere," Ida said flatly, hand firm and unyielding on Pauline's shoulder. "Winifred needs. She'll get help from Tokala, not from you getting yourself and that baby killed through foolish heroism. You're in no condition to ride, let alone fight." Tokala was already moving, checking rifle, knife-counting ammunition, running dangerously low after days of conflict. He caught Pauline's eyes across room, and she saw conflict written clearly: duty to Winifred, who'd risked everything helping them, duty to Pauline carrying his child. "Go," Pauline said through gritted teeth, another false contraction making her curl inward. "But you come back to me. However you have to do it, you come back." "I will." He crossed in 2 strides, knelt beside cot despite protesting ribs, pressed forehead briefly to hers. Gesture of connection and promise, transcending words. Then he stood and left without looking back, because looking back would have shattered resolve to leave it all. Wild Annie materialized 20 minutes later, with 2 women from Sewing Circle, hard-faced, capable women who'd birthed children and buried husbands, knew exactly what help was needed. They settled around Pauline with clean cloths and heated water and calm, steady competence from long experience with crisis. Not real labor, Annie said after quick, thorough examination. But close enough, another major shock might push you over. So, you're lying completely still, breathing slow and steady, trusting that man of yours to handle what needs handling. Pauline wanted arguing, but another contraction hit false but agonizing, and all she could do was grip Annie's hand with desperate strength and try not screaming. Coal dust mine sat 3 mi northeast, played out silver claim abandoned when ore ran thin, and support timbers started rotting. Main shaft penetrated 200 FT into hillside, branching into side chambers optimistically carved during boom years. Now just dangerous holes, surrounded by rusted equipment and skeletal stamping mill remains. Takala left horse quarter mile out, approached on foot, using every scrap of cover broken terrain offered. Sun setting painting world in blood and copper shadows lengthening across broken ground. Could hear voices echoing from inside Joe's flat, emotionless monotone and higher pitch of at least one other man. Winterfred wasn't making sound, meaning either gagged or injured too badly to cry out. Tokala slipped inside mine entrance like smoke, moving with absolute silence, despite pain radiating from shoulder and ribs with each careful movement, letting eyes adjust gradually to deeper darkness. Air thick with decades of accumulated dust and acrid mineral smell of old dynamite soaked into rock. Support timbers groaned under immense earth weight. Some visibly cracked, few actually splitting as he watched. Found them in 3rd chamber, back Winifred tied to support post with rough rope, already rubbing wrists raw and bleeding filthy gag across mouth, face pale with fear, but eyes alert tracking his approach. Joe stood guard with shotgun propped against shoulder, while 2 other men crouched nearby, playing desultory cards by lantern light. Clearly bored. Takala moved fast, exploding from darkness like nightmare. Knife in hand, though didn't consciously remember drawing it. He broke first card player's wrist with precise twist and strike, dislocating bones without cutting, merciful by his standards under circumstances. Man screamed high and piercing in confined space. Partner fumbled for pistol, tucked in belt. Finally drew it raised with shaking hands. Fired wildly without aiming. Gunshot in confined chamber. Catastrophically loud muzzle flash. Blinding concussion. Painful. Bullets sparked off ore cart with vicious whine ricocheting before embedding somewhere in darkness. Takala rolled behind cart and returned fire. Slow. Carefully placed shots meant to drive them back and create space rather than kill. 2 rounds precisely aimed, forcing both to scramble for cover. He reached Winterfred, cut bonds with 2 quick slashes, pulled gag free. She gasped and coughed, drawing great shuddering breaths. The beam, she choked out, voice raw. Support beam is cracked. Sound like world-breaking deep fundamental cracks seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. Support. Timber directly above split down, entire length fracture, racing along wood faster than thought. Dust rained in choking clouds. Ceilings sagged visibly, rock grinding against rock with sound like distant thunder. Run! Takala shoved Winterford toward tunnel exit. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just run. They ran, stumbling over loose rock and abandoned equipment. Old rail ties catching feet behind them. Ceiling collapsed with roar, like avalanche filling chamber with rubble and dust and absolute darkness. Chunk of rock size of man's head caught Kala's left ankle with sickening force, not pinning completely, but striking hard enough. Blinding pain shot up entire leg. He felt something give way inside ligaments, tearing joint twisting wrongly. He stumbled, nearly went down, forced himself forward through desperate will because stopping meant being buried alive. They burst out into twilight, both coughing violently, covered head to foot in pale dust, making them look like ghosts. And there, waiting with shotgun, leveled in dead eye, gleaming in fading light, stood Joe. He didn't speak. Shotgun said everything. Takala's knife still in hand, but throwing it meant being completely unarmed. Afterward, gamble he couldn't afford. So he did, only thing he could throw at it. Not at Joe, but at lantern the man had set on nearby rock. Blade struck true, punching through glass and metal. Oil sprayed in fine mist. Flame guttered. Flicker died with hiss of acrid smoke. Darkness swallowed them completely. Takala grabbed Winterfred's hand and ran or tried to run despite ankle-screaming protest with each step joint, giving way randomly, threatening to drop him with every stride. They crashed through scrub and sage, using broken terrain and gathering night to break line of sight. Stumbling into gullies and scrambling up far sides with desperate clawing fingers behind. Joe didn't pursue immediately. Just stood at mine entrance, methodically reloading shotgun with mechanical patience of man, knowing time was on his side. They made it back more than an hour after full dark. Winifred, half carrying Tokala when damaged ankle, finally refused bearing any weight. Stumbled through Ida's back door, both filthy and exhausted beyond measure. Tokala's face gray with pain. He was desperately trying to hide. Pauline sat up the instant they entered, hand flying to mouth. You're hurt. How badly? I'm alive. That's what matters. That's not remotely the same thing. She was off caught before anyone could stop her hands, reaching instinctively, checking his face. His shoulder, where old wound had started seeping again on the way he held all weight on right leg. When her thumb brushed his cheekbone, achingly tender gesture. He closed eyes briefly against emotion he couldn't quite name. I came back, he said quietly. I know. I never doubted. Ida examined ankle with gentle but thorough hands, manipulating joint to check for breaks, probing swelling already turning flesh. Purple and hot, not broken, but badly sprained, possibly torn ligaments. You need complete rest for at least 3 days, preferably week. We don't have 3 days, Takala said flatly, each word carefully measured to avoid stressing cracked ribs. I'm aware, so you'll work through pain and accept you won't move fast or gracefully. One wrong step, and you'll go down hard. He nodded, jaw tight with understanding. Let Pauline help him to cot where he sat. Heavily, exhaustion finally showing through iron control. She sat beside him without asking hand, finding his naturally fingers intertwining with ease of long practice. We're not fine, she said softly. Simple fact rather than complaint. No, but we're still together. That counts for something. Does it count for enough? It has to, because it's all we have. Outside, wind rose steadily, rattling shutters and tearing at loose boards, carrying promise of storm that would provide cover for their final desperate move. Tomorrow night, one way or another, this would end. Storm hit Brimstone like biblical wrath wind, howling down from Tombstone Ridge with force to tear shingles from roofs and send shutters banging violently against walls. Thunder rolled through valley, each peal loud enough to rattle windows and frames. Lightning split sky in jagged bolts, turning night to day for heartbeats, illuminating world gone mad with weather. Under that chaos cover, 4 people moved through darkness toward Courthouse Tocala, limping badly but refusing assistance despite pain radiating from shoulder ribs, ankle with each agonizing step. Pauline with satchel pressed to chest, Winifred with borrowed pistol tucked in belt jaw, set with determination. Lucky Pete carrying crowbar and wearing expression between excitement and terror. They approached from alley behind Main, using Storm's fury to mask sound and movement. Courthouse mostly dark, one lamp burning in Sheriff's ground floor office. But second floor, where safe waited, was pitch black door locked, good Yale manufacturer, designed resisting casual picking. But Pauline had learned from Master. She pulled thin tempered steel strip from boot, where she always kept it bent at precise angles. Cyrus taught, worked it into keyhole with patience, born from practice and necessity. Wind howled, thunder boomed, lightning turned alleys stark white for instant. Lock clicked. Door swung inward silently on well-oiled hinges. They slipped inside, water dripping from soaked clothing boots, squatching on floors, creaking treacherously. Tocala closed door with aching care despite pain shooting through ribs with the movement. Then took position near it, rifle across chest despite protesting injuries. Eyes fixed on dark hallway leading to sheriff's office where single lamp still burned. Safe waited second floor in clerk's office. Squad iron beast with combination dial and separate keyhole for ration warehouse. Pauline knelt before it, pressed ear against cold metal, seeming to suck warmth from skin, began turning dial with infinite patience. She'd learned this during long winter nights when Cyrus needed something to pass time between freight runs. He'd taught her safes had personalities, quirks, ways of speaking if you knew their language. This American safety model was common in territorial offices. 3 numbers lever mechanism predictable if you understood pattern. She turned dial slowly, feeling for almost imperceptible resistance, marking each correct tumbler. World narrowed to fingertips, touching still faint clicks and vibrations, speaking of internal mechanisms moving. Behind her, Winterfred kept watch at window overlooking Main. Pete stood at stair-top crowbar, gripped in white-knuckled hands, ready to bar door if anyone came up. Tocala remained at entry silent sentinel, despite throbbing agony radiating from multiple injuries with each heartbeat. 5 minutes passed. 7:10. Pauline felt first number fall into place. Subtle click, more sensation than sound. Market mentally continued turning. Downstairs door opened. Footsteps on wooden stairs, heavy and deliberate. Voices rising muffled by distance, but unmistakably present. And moving closer. "Company?" Pete hissed urgently. Multiple contacts coming up. Tocala shifted grip on rifle despite pain lancing through cracked ribs. "How many?" "Can't tell for certain. At least 3, maybe more." Pauline forced herself, breathing slowly, ignoring panic, clawing a chest, focusing only on safe. Second number. She was close, so desperately close. Footsteps grew louder, climbing steadily. Someone laughed, harsh, familiar. Reginald's voice carrying clearly. Third number. Safe's lever gave with satisfying metallic clunk, seeming impossibly loud, intense silence. Pauline pulled door open, hands shaking with released tension. Inside stacks of official papers, small cash box, and hanging from hook, the key to ration warehouse on leather thong. She grabbed it along with folder of telegraph contracts and falsified ballot tallies matching every ledger entry. Office doors slammed open with force to crack plaster. Lantern lights spilled across threshold, harsh and blinding after darkness. Reginald Pike stood framed in doorway, Glassy Joe at shoulder. 2 deputies flanking. All 4 had guns drawn and leveled. Reginald's face twisted with triumph and fury, equally sweat gleaming despite Storm's cold. "End of the road, Mrs. Hart. Put down those papers and step away from the safe. Do it now." Takala moved immediately, despite screaming pain from ribs and ankle, not retreating, but advancing, positioning himself directly between doorway and Pauline. Rifle came up smoothly despite agony. "No, you want her. You go through me first. You don't have a choice here. Everyone has choices. You just don't like mine." Joe raised shotgun with cold deliberation, that dead eye gleaming. "Step aside. This doesn't have to be your fight. Everything threatening her is my fight. Everything threatening truth is my fight. You want to shoot me for that, go ahead. But everyone in this town will know why." For a long suspended moment, no one moved. Storm raged outside, wind battering building, thunder rolling like artillery. Inside, 5 guns drawn, multiple fingers on triggers. Only one wrong word needed to transform this into massacre. Then Pete did something either incredibly brave or stupid. He swung crowbar at nearest lamp with all strength. Glass shattered. Flaming oil sprayed across floor. Room plunged into darkness, broken only by spreading flames, casting dancing hellish shadows. "Go," Takala shouted. "Move now." They crashed through courthouse like hurricane, made human, all stealth abandoned for desperate speed. Tokala led despite injured ankle and cracked ribs, screaming protest with each agonizing step. Rifle held crosswise to batter aside furniture despite pain. Pauline followed, clutching papers, and key to chest satchel with precious ledger bouncing against hip. Winifred and Pete brought up rear school teacher, firing borrowed pistol back toward office shots aimed more to discourage than kill, buying precious seconds. Behind them, Reginald's voice rose in incoherent fury. "Stop them. Don't let them reach the street. Shoot them if you have to." They hit back door at full speed. Takala's shoulder. The injured one slammed into wood, snapping interior latch despite fresh agony. Door flew open, and they spilled into alley rain, immediately soaking them cold enough to steal breath wind, tearing it close with clawing fingers. Gunfire erupted from courthouse door behind. Bullets sang past close enough for Pauline to feel its passage. Another struck wall beside Takala's head, showering him with brick fragments. They ran through streets transformed into rivers, boots splashing through ankle-deep water, reflecting lightning in brilliant flashes. Rail yard lay 2 blocks distant. Pete's backup plan. Horses stashed there for fast escape. Another shot cracked from behind. This one grazed across Tokala's right side just below ribs, not deep skimming across muscle rather than penetrating, but painful enough to make him stumble and drawing fresh blood mixing with rain. "Keep moving," he gasped, refusing to slow despite compounding injuries. They reached horses, 4 animals, all thoroughly spooked, but still tied where Pete left them. He worked with shaking hands, cutting them loose, while Takala boosted Pauline onto largest mare despite screaming pain from ribs and ankle. Then pulled himself up behind her with visible effort. Ankle nearly buckled, putting weight in stirrup, but he gritted teeth and forced himself up. "Pete," Takala called out. "You and Winifred take the back way through the old freight tunnel behind the druggist. It comes out near the polling barn. You can get there ahead of us and blend into the crowd. Go now." Pete's eyes widened with understanding. The tunnel right. "Come on, Miss Hale." Wyfred didn't hesitate. She and Pete abandoned the remaining horses, disappearing into the darkness between buildings, heading for the concealed route that only locals knew. An old freight passage built during the silver boom that connected the warehouse district to the polling barn storage cellar. Tokala kicked his mare into motion as Reginald and Joe burst from the courthouse on their own mounts. The rail yard stretched before the maze of iron tracks gleaming like mercury in lightning puddles reflecting storm-torn sky. Abandoned freight cars creating obstacles and cover. They rode hard horses screaming fear but responding to desperate guidance, hooves striking sparks where they hit bare metal. Behind more riders appeared. Reginald leading Joe close behind deputies fanning out. Joe raised his Sharps rifle despite rain and wind sighting with practiced expertise fired. Rounds screamed past Tokala's head, missing by inches close enough. Pauline felt him flinch involuntarily. Felt his arms tighten around her waist despite the pain it caused him. She leaned back hard against his chest, making herself smaller, pressing into him as if she could somehow protect him through proximity. Another shot. This one hit ground directly beside their horse's hooves, sending up geyser of mud. Mare screamed and swerved violently. Tokala fought for control despite pain making every movement. Agony hands gentle but firm on reins, voice low and steady in animals' ears in Lakota that Pauline didn't understand but horse clearly responded to. They cut north toward open flats where polling barns stood. The barn was their destination, anyway, place where truth would be revealed. They'd simply arrived earlier and more desperately than planned. But then Pauline gasped, sharp, indrawn breath of pain rather than fear. Her hand flew to belly, pressing hard. Tokala, what's wrong? The baby. Something's the stress. It hurts. Hold on. We're almost there. Just hold on. The barn was packed with far more people than should have been there at this hour. And in this weather, homesteaders and Lakota ranchers and townsmen, even several women who defied propriety to witness whatever was about to happen. Orlando Dawes stood near registration table, son Ronan, leaning on crutch beside him despite wounded leg. Judge Halford sat behind table spectacles, sliding down nose clerks to either side, looking nervous. Air thick with tension, tobacco smoke, wet wool, collective smell of humanity packed too close into this charged atmosphere. Tokala rode his exhausted horse straight through wide-open barn doors. Animals' hooves striking packed earth floor with heavy thuds echoing like drum beats. Men shouted scrambling aside. Mare skidded to stop in barn center sides, heaving foam flying from mouth eyes rolling white. Tala dismounted, caught Pauline as she slid down. Barely caught her, because she was gasping with pain. Hand pressed hard to belly where baby was no longer just restless, but actively distressed. He steadied her with both arms despite his own agony from shoulder ribs, ankle entire focus on keeping her upright and safe. She was soaked to skin, mud caking skirts to face pale as death, but eyes burning with determination. Satchel still strapped across chest, papers from safe clutched in free hand, crumpled but intact. She limped really directly to registration table boots, squelching with each painful step. When she reached table, she slammed papers down in front of Judge Halford with enough force to rattle inkwell. Read it. Her voice carried across sudden silence, loud enough for everyone. Read every word. Read the water theft. Read the ballot manipulation. Read how they've been starving us to control votes. Read it all. Judge Halford picked up first page with visibly trembling hands. Eyes scanned text widening with each line. Flipped to next page, then next, mouth compressing into thin line. He removed spectacles, cleaned them with corner of vest. Despite lenses being perfectly clear, replaced them red more. Barn door crashed open second time with explosive force. Reginald Pike rode in on altered horse animals' eyes, wild flanks bloody from desperate spurring. Behind him, Glassy Joe and 3 deputies, all mounted, all armed, all radiating barely controlled violence. Reginald leveled pistol directly at Pauline, barrel rock steady, despite heaving breath and obvious fury. Finger rested on trigger, applying visible pressure. "Step away from that table, Mrs. Hart. Those papers are stolen property, and you're under arrest." Barn went absolutely silent. Every person present understood, man with gun pointed at heavily pregnant woman's belly in full public view. "Those papers," Pauline said, voice not wavering despite pain radiating through abdomen, "are evidence of systematic election fraud, water theft, and deliberate starvation of citizens to manipulate democracy. Evidence that Sheriff Pike and his son have weaponized government resources against the very people they're supposed to serve." "She's lying," Reginald said flatly. "Slanderous accusations from a woman of questionable character." "I'm standing right here," Takala interrupted, voice cutting through Reginald's like blade. "Which means you're calling me a liar too. So say it to my face, Reginald. Call me a liar while everyone watches." Reginald's jaw clenched so hard Pauline could hear teeth grinding. "Fine. You're a liar, a savage who doesn't understand civilization, and she's a white woman who degraded herself." Takala moved, then not toward Reginald, but toward Pauline. He positioned himself directly between her and the gun, placing his own body in the line of fire, despite the agony each movement cost him. Inch by deliberate inch, he crossed space until pistol's barrel aimed at his chest instead of her belly. "If you need to shoot someone," Takala said quietly, each word clear and distinct despite pain making breathing difficult. "Shoot me. Go ahead, pull that trigger. But everyone here, every single witness, will know exactly what you are." Judge Halford stood abruptly, papers clutched in shaking hands, voice surprisingly steady. "These documents appear to be official county records. Water rights transfers, telegraph contracts, ballot box routing, all bearing Sheriff Pike's signature and seal. And there's notation about holding government winter rations as election property until after votes are counted. Orlando limped forward, son supporting him. You're telling me the drought killing our crops was deliberate, that they planned it?" "Yes," Pauline said, voice breaking slightly with pain and emotion. "Every bit. It's documented in the ledger. Every transfer, every stolen vote, every family they starved maintaining power. My employer tracked it all before they killed him." Murmur rising from crowd was low and dangerous sound of men pushed past endurance who'd watched families suffer, accepted hardship as inevitable, only to discover it was calculated cruelty. Reginald's hand trembled on pistol. Sweat mixed with rain despite cold, his carefully constructed world crumbling, and he could feel it slipping with each passing second. So he lunged, dropping gun entirely, favoring fists. Pure rage drove him forward. He threw himself at Takala with wild haymaker aimed at head. But Takala was catastrophically injured, shoulder wounded, ribs, cracked ankle barely functional. When Reginald's fist connected with his jaw, his head snapped sideways violently. He tried to grapple back, but his body wouldn't respond properly. Reginald drove knee up into his already damaged ribs with vicious intent. The impact was agonizing. Takala felt something shift inside, possibly rye fragment moving dangerously close to lung. He gasped, doubling over involuntarily, and Reginald seized the advantage, shoving him backward. Takala crashed to ground, hard landing on his injured shoulder and ankle simultaneously. White-hot pain exploded through his entire body. He tried rising, but his ankle gave out completely. He was down, helpless, and Reginald was standing over him with fists raised for killing blows. "Enough." Orlando's voice rang out as he and 3 other homesteaders rushed forward, grabbing Reginald and physically dragging him off to Kayla. "We've seen enough." Glassy Joe raised pistol with cold deliberation, aiming at Takala's prone form. Finger began squeezing trigger. Winifred Hale, having arrived earlier through the freight tunnel and positioned herself carefully in the crowd, didn't hesitate, even a heartbeat. She grabbed full ballot barrel, easily 50 lb, and swung it with all considerable strength directly into Joe's ribs. Gun discharge shot, going high and wild, punching hole in barn roof through which rain immediately began dripping. Recoil and impact combined knocked Joe completely off his horse. He hit ground hard, wind driven from lungs. Pete and two other men immediately piled onto Joe, pinning him down, disarming him while he struggled weakly. Judge Halford slammed Gavlon Deeger with explosive force crack, echoing like gunshot. Enough. By authority vested in me as territorial precinct judge, I declare Sheriff Ephraim Pike and Reginald Pike hereby disqualified from this election pending full territorial investigation. Deputies not complicit in documented crimes seize courthouse safe contents and open reservoir gate immediately per emergency order. Everyone else stand down or face charges. Crowds surged forward, not violently, but with unified purpose. Men surrounded deputies, disarming through overwhelming numbers. Orlando and others maintained iron grip on struggling Reginald. Orlando looked down at Tokala, still on ground, gasping with pain. "We've got him. You just rest now. You did enough." Reginald managed to wrench free, briefly bolted for door. The storm-driven wind tore barn door from its weakened hinges. Heavy wood swinging wide with terrifying force, driven by gust, seeming aimed with malicious intent. Tokala, still on ground and gasping, saw it coming. Saw Pauline standing directly in Door's path, frozen with shock and pain. Without thought, without calculation of cost, he threw himself forward across distance. Not far. Couldn't go far with injuries, but far enough. He caught Pauline around waist and pulled her backward, rolling them both away as massive doors slammed against wall where she'd been standing with enough force to crack timber. Impact shook entire building. Splinters flew like shrapnel. They lay tangled together on ground. Both breathing hard to Kayla, half atop her in protective sprawl, despite every injury screaming. His ankle was agony, shoulder bleeding again. Ribs felt like they might puncture lung any moment. But she was alive and breathing, and that was all that mattered. Pauline's hand found his face cupping, bruised and bleeding cheek with infinite gentleness. "You're hurt so badly. Doesn't matter. It matters to me. We're alive. That's what matters." Outside, Reginald managed to catch loose. Horse kicked it into storm, disappearing into sheets of rain. Orlando and 6 mounted men gave immediate chase shouts lost to thunder. Inside barn, Judge Halford held ledger high overhead where everyone could see. "This is evidence. This is proof. This is how we reclaim democracy, by making sure every person here can read truth with their own eyes." Crowd roared approval loud enough to be heard over storm. Water returned to Tallow Creek at dawn, storm having passed and left world scrubbed clean. Orlando and riders had cut reservoir gate chains with bolt cutters borrowed from town. Blacksmith smashed lock with sledgehammer, taking 6 men swinging in rotation. Open gates wide for full flow. First surge was brown with sediment, but it was water-cold clean. Life-giving water spreading through irrigation ditches, soaking into earth cracked and dead for 6 months. Children ran to W's edge despite early hour laughing and splashing. Women wept openly. Men stood in silence, watching creek filled too, overwhelmed for words. Ida and Annie carefully transported Pauline to Winifred's schoolhouse, warmer and cleaner than doctor's office with actual proper bed. Examined thoroughly, checking for premature labor, confirming that despite everything, stress, fear, physical trauma, she and baby had somehow escaped serious harm. "Not in active labor yet," Ida said with relief. "But close, very close. Another shock, and there will be no stopping it." Then I'll be careful avoiding shocks, Pauline said with attempted humor that fell flat. Takala sat behind her on bed back against wall. Despite every injury, protesting arms wrapped carefully around her for warmth as dawn cold crept through gaps. He was a mess, shoulder bleeding through fresh bandages, ribs wrapped so tight he could barely breathe. Ankles swollen grotesquely face, showing clear marks of Reginald's fists. But he was alive, and she was alive, and baby was alive. And in this moment, that was enough. Ida taught them breathing rhythms she'd learned from Navajo midwife decades ago. Pattern helping manage pain and fear. In for 4, hold 4, out 4. Slow and steady, finding calm and rhythm. Pauline followed pattern, back pressed against Toka's chest, feeling his ribs expand and contract with hers despite his pain. Their breathing synchronized naturally, effortlessly. Heartbeats found rhythm, no words needed. Reginald Pike was captured at Ice Creek Ford 4 hours after dawn. Horse having foundered in rain-swollen current, throwing him into cold water, running high and fast. He'd crawled to muddy bank shivering and defeated all arrogance drowned. Orlando's riders dragged him back soaked and humiliated, fine suit torn beyond salvaging, and locked him in courthouse jail using his own belt as makeshift handcuffs. Glass-eyed Joe, already in custody after being subdued in the barn, was formally arrested by the men who pinned him. Orlando made sure both prisoners were secured before Marshal Grant's arrival. Sheriff Ephraim Pike rode in shortly after gray and stiff face, carved from granite, revealing nothing. He saw his son in cells, saw crowd with ledger spread on table. In public view, saw water running again in Tallow Creek. He dismounted slowly. Movements careful, raised both hands in clear surrender. Territorial Marshal has been summoned. I'll submit to his authority and answer whatever questions he has. Marshal is already here, said new voice carrying legitimate authority. Man in dusty but official uniform stepped through crowd badge gleaming genuine federal issue. Marshal Theodore Grant, known throughout 3 territories as man who couldn't be bought or intimidated. I received telegraph 3 days ago from the territorial advocate, Grant said calmly but firmly. They forwarded urgent message from Mrs. Pauline Hart alleging systematic election fraud and resource theft. I came immediately. Appears I arrived just in time to witness conclusion. He picked up ledger, flipped methodically through pages, nodded with grim satisfaction. Sufficient evidence for formal federal charges. Ephraim Pike, Reginald Pike, Glass Eye, Joe Mallory. You're all under arrest, pending trial on charges including election fraud, theft of public resources, conspiracy to deny voting rights, unlawful imprisonment, assault, kidnapping, and suspicion of murder in death of freighter Cyrus Bale. Crowd erupted in vindicated cheers. Territorial election proceeded 5 days later under Grant's direct supervision. Ballot boxes counted in full daylight in Main Street Center with witnesses from every faction. Count meticulous, transparent, multiply recorded. Reform slate won by genuinely narrow margins. Orlando Dawes as sheriff, 53%. Maddow as water commissioner, 51%. Helen Cortez as county clerk, 56%. Not landslide. Democracy. Messy contested legitimate precious. Wyfred used courthouse safe K to unlock Pike Warehouse distributed winter rations according to original government lists. Families arrived with wagons loading flour, salt pork lard beans held hostage for months. Faces showing relief mixed with lingering anger. Orlando drafted comprehensive water-sharing agreement, placing homesteads and Lakota camps on equal footing rotation system based on documented need rather than wealth with clear enforceable penalties. Had it notarized, filed in triplicate, posted publicly. Federal trial scheduled for 2 months out, allowing time for evidence gathering. But everyone understood outcome was certain. Ledger 2 detailed conspiracy. 2 well-documented witnesses too numerous. On 7th day after storm, with morning air smelling of wet sage and new growth pushing through earth, finally blessed with water, Pauline went into genuine labor. Started just after dawn, tightening across belly she'd felt before, but this time different, deeper, inexorable. Contractions regular as clockwork, strengthening with each wave. She tried hiding it initially, not wanting to worry anyone, but Takala noticed immediately. He always noticed. "It's time," he said, simply not question. "Yes, it's time." He helped her to bed Ida had prepared, brought heated water, fetched clean cloths, then stayed at her side through every contraction, despite his own injuries, still healing his hand, gripping her voice low and steady, guiding her through breathing rhythm despite pain from cracked ribs making each breath cost him. "In for 4, hold out for 4. You're doing perfectly. Breathe in." Labor lasted 8 hours, not quick, not dangerously prolonged. When baby finally came slick and purple and screaming displeasure at cold air, Ida caught him in clean linen, immediately laid him on Pauline's chest. Boy, small but healthy, surprising amount of dark hair, lungs, announcing presence with impressive volume. Ida cut and tied, cord-cleaned baby with warm water, wrapped him in quilt Wyfred brought. Pauline held sun tears streaming freely beyond words or thought, existing purely in this moment of overwhelming connection. Tokala knelt beside bed, despite protesting injuries, one hand cradling baby's impossibly small head, forehead resting against Pauline's temple. Didn't speak because there were no words adequate for what he felt. Relief and joy and terror and love all mixed into something too large for language. They named him Cyrus, honoring man, who died exposing corruption and protecting truth. Cyrus Hart, both parents' names legally recorded, on papers filed with territorial clerk, where no one could dispute his legitimacy. 3 days later, as Pauline sat by window nursing Cyrus, while Winterfred taught chattering children, Ida was organizing courthouse documents for Marshal Grant when she found something she'd somehow missed. Tucked into very back of Ledger's leather binding, hidden in stitching, where only incredibly careful hands would discover, was sealed. Envelope wax seal, unbroken paper, slightly yellowed across front, in Cyrus's distinctive hand, to be opened only by Pauline Hart or legitimate territorial federal authority. Edita brought it immediately to Pauline, who opened with shaking hands, while Toka looked over shoulder. Winifred stopped teaching to watch. Inside was affidavit, written in Cyrus's meticulous script, dated 2 days before his murder. Cyrus Bale, being of sound mind and facing credible threats to my life, do hereby swear and attest to the following facts witnessed by me personally on the 14th day of April in the year 1858. At approximately 3 horas, I was delivering ballot supplies to depot near Dagger Point when I observed altercation between freighter William Morrison and Reginald Pike. Argument concerned payment for services and escalated to physical violence. I witnessed Reginald Pike draw a pistol and fire 3 shots at close range into William Morrison's chest and abdomen. Morrison fell. Pike searched his wagon, appeared frustrated at not finding what he sought, departed without rendering aid. I approached and found Morrison still alive, but gravely wounded. Before dying, Morrison told me he'd been hauling ballot boxes that didn't add up right and had threatened reporting discrepancies to territorial authorities. He believed Pike killed him, preventing this report. I kept silent from fear for my safety and that of my employee, Mrs. Pauline Hart. But I have documented everything in ledgers she possesses. If you read this, I am likely dead, probably by same hand that killed Morrison. I secreted this affidavit in the ledger binding using a simple code. The page numbers where I recorded Pike's water theft payments, pages 47, 93, 142, add up to 282, divided by 2 for the 2 witnesses, equals 1 to 41. The exact number of days between Morrison's murder and when I hid this document. Only someone carefully studying the ledger's financial patterns would notice. I pray Pauline or a righteous authority finds this. Below Cyrus's signature were 2 additional names. Teamsters who'd happened upon scene moments after shooting seen Reginald Pike riding away. Agreed. Witnessing Cyrus's testimony in exchange for his promise, seeking justice through proper legal channels rather than frontier violence. Pauline read it twice, 3 times, vision blurring with tears, equal parts grief and vindicated relief. He knew. He documented everything. He protected this evidence, even knowing it might cost his life. And he hid it so cleverly using the ledger's own numbers as a key. And now it can be used, Marshal Grant said from doorway, where he'd arrived unnoticed. That affidavit, combined with ledger documentation and witness statements I've collected, establishes clear motive and pattern. Murder charges will be filed immediately against Reginald Pike. First-degree premeditated with special circumstances, making it capital case. Pike trial became territorial news, covered by papers in 3 jurisdictions. Verdict when it came. 6 weeks later, surprised no one who'd followed evidence. Ephraim Pike received 15 years for fraud and conspiracy. Reginald Pike sentenced to hang for murder. Glassy Joe Mallory received 10 years for kidnapping conspiracy and attempted murder. Tocala and Orlando worked together through late spring and early summer, despite Tocala's injuries, healing slowly building flood control crib on Tallow Creek upstream, from schoolhouse structure using techniques Tocala learned from grandfather, combining angled rocks and woven willow branches, redirecting spring runoff, protecting buildings from flash flooding. Plaguing this valley every few years, they worked side by side in cold water. Orlando's respect for Tocala, growing daily, watching precision and care. He brought to every task how he approached problems with patience rather than force, quiet competence, speaking louder than words. Pauline recovered slowly from childbirth, nursing Cyrus by window while Winred taught students. Baby was quiet and watchful, dark eyes tracking movement with surprising alertness for infant. When he cried, which was rarely, it was with clear purpose, hunger or discomfort, never simple fussiness. On hill beyond town, Lakota camps and scattered homesteads shared same sunset, same water flowing freely again, same fragile hope that maybe things could be different going forward. Better, more just. At night, when desert cold crept through walls despite stove burning hot, Tocala lay behind Pauline's body, curved protectively around hers, careful of her healing body. His arm rested across her ribs, not possessive, simply present. His breath stirred her hair in steady rhythm. "I will carry what you can't," he whispered against her neck. "And I'll carry what you can't," she whispered back, hand covering his. "What could I possibly need carried? Your certainty you're not good enough. Your fear this won't last. Your belief you don't deserve softness, or rest, or joy." He was silent for a long moment, breathing steady against her shoulder. Then so quietly she almost didn't hear. "You see too much. I see exactly what needs seeing, and I'm not going anywhere. Promise, promise." The West didn't soften with their victory. Barbed wires still drew blood. Winter still killed unprepared. Men still lied and cheated when they thought they could escape consequences. Power still corrupted. But in one small town in harsh land, a ledger had been read publicly where everyone could hear. Conspiracy exposed through documentation and courage. Water returned to people needing it for survival rather than profit. And power wrestled, however, temporarily, however, imperfectly back to people who'd earned it through generations of survival. That wasn't justice in grand philosophical sense. It was justice in only sense, mattering on this frontier, witnessed, documented, fought for, with blood and determination, held accountable by many hands working together. Sometimes in place where law was often, whatever man with most guns said, it was that kind of justice was everything. And sometimes in quiet hours between dusk and full dark, when woman nursed newborn son, while husband built structures, protecting strangers from floods, and schoolteacher taught children to read so they could verify documents themselves rather than trusting others to tell them truth. Sometimes that was enough to call it victory. Not perfect, not permanent, but